Hey fearsome friends. Now I can't count the amount of times I've been followed creepily around a store by its owner, either to try to sell me something or keep an eye on me. But I can't imagine being followed by a random person for unknown reasons. These are some creepy-ass stories, so sit back, relax, get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. This happened last night. I work at a very popular grocery store called Walmart as a cashier. At our store, cashiers also stand in as counters at the door, and that was my position today. At around 7-ish, this man walked in wearing a gas mask, full black clothes, including a black beanie, and was carrying a massive white pillowcase full of stuff. I immediately got a bad feeling from him, as he'd walked in and gone behind the registers, where people who have checked out are walking around, and he just stood there for a bit, watching. I stopped to watch him for a bit, because I still have to stay at my post to count. But when I looked back to where he was gone. I couldn't see him anywhere for about 10 minutes, until I looked over to the service desk and found him there. He'd taken off his mask and was on our desk phone. My co-worker then came over to me and told me that the guide said he was stranded and lived about 3 to 4 hours away. Shortly after that, I was sent on my 15-minute break, and when I came back, I couldn't see him anywhere. For the next 10 to 15 minutes, I was taking items that people had left up front, back to where they should be, and whilst doing this, another co-worker from produce walked by me and told me that there was a crazy guy with a gas mask in his department and was chanting something weird. I returned to the front, and sure enough, the guy was walking around the food aisles, chanting what sounded like, "You know what you are what you believe," over and over again. I was then sent back to count, when this guy got to the self-checkout to buy a single gallon of water. After checking out, he left, and I watched him walk to the end of the last aisle of cars, turn around and walk back. He stopped just outside the doors where the cement meets the pavement, and put his stuff down to start chanting again. He was saying stuff like, "Jesus, ass. Women, ass. Children, ass." I don't know exactly what he was saying, but that's what I could make out. People walking in started to complain to me, so I went to my manager and she got the 3 store managers to come up. While I'm waiting for them, this guy put his gas mask back on and was just staring into the store at me. Finally, the store managers arrived and talked to him. He finally left, and I was told that if he came back, to tell them and they would call the cops. But thankfully, he never came back. This happened to my co-worker yesterday, and it was really wild. We work at a bookstore, and my co-worker is so nice. She's always helping customers out, and she always makes small talk with them. I noticed that she'd helped this one particular customer find a book for a while, and then saw that she'd rung him up. But as she was ringing him up, I overheard him tell her that he has a B12 company, and that he'd be bringing her something later, since she'd yawned and mentioned that she was tired, as it was finals time. After the customer left, I asked her if she was okay, and she was. She didn't think the customer was even going to come back. But he did. 2 hours later, my friend was on her lunch break, and the customer came back in, carrying a bag in his hand with a mini packet. It looked like the ones that gushers have, and a little can. The customer was upset that he couldn't see my co-worker after another one had notified him that she wasn't in the store, and we didn't know when she'd be back from her break. She told him that we could hold on to whatever he wanted to give her, but he was insisting that he personally gave it to her himself, and wanted to explain to her how to take it and what it's for. He then left after a few minutes of arguing with co-worker 2, but didn't say anything about coming back. But he came back again. This time he talked to my manager and I at customer service, and we told him that she wasn't there and that he needed to come back another day. He looked at us like we were the sus ones, when he was the one that was suspicious. He finally left, but as he was driving off in his car, he drove slowly past the store windows and looked in. We made eye contact as he was driving by too, so it made things extra weird. I'm pretty sure he wanted to drug her and snatch her, because of how serious he was about talking to her about it. It's crazy how she was just doing her job, and this guy thought it was okay to act this way. This story takes place in the early 2000s, so was about 15 to 16 years ago. This was a time when it was still cool to spend a few hours at the mall, hanging out with your friends, and basically just being teenagers. We were 13 or 14 at the time, and my friends Beth and Mary and I had been dropped off that day at the mall. We spent our time shopping, walking around, meeting friends, and eating and chilling in the food court. And this was just a normal day. That is, until it wasn't. After spending a few hours at the mall, we decided to call it quits and head back to Mary's house for our sleepover. But as we made our way to the glass door exit, a man, who seemingly came out of nowhere, was walking towards us and stopping right in front of us. We stopped maybe 5 to 7 feet away, and my friends and I exchanged a few confused glances. He was an older man, maybe mid-30s, wearing a long, light trench coat type jacket, which I personally thought was odd, given it was summertime in the Midwest. Nothing else particularly stood out about him. He was just an average-looking dude. But something about him just made me feel uneasy. Then some words came out of his mouth that still haunt me now when I think of this story. "Hi, Mary. You've been all over the mall with your friends today." Something right then didn't feel right, and we all felt it. Without saying a word, my friends and I booked it as fast as we could to the exit. After reaching outside, we stopped briefly to gather our thoughts. Beth and I asked Mary if she knew the man, and she didn't at all. Mary said she had never seen him before in her life. Panic set in, and frantically we called Mary's mom, who thankfully was already pulling into the parking lot to pick us up. We explained what had happened, and her mom immediately called the police when we returned home. An officer came and took our statements, and said they would put the word out and keep an eye out as well, but we never heard anything after this. It still freaks me out to think that this man had clearly been following us the entire day without our knowledge, and even scarier to think that at one point he was close enough to us to learn Mary's name, and we had no idea the entire time. So this happened to me back in 2013, when I was on holiday in the southwest of England. I was 19 at the time, and with my girlfriend of the time who was 18. We were in a small coastal town, and due to the local geology, there were a lot of gemstone shops that sold things like crystals, gemstones, and hematite rings, etc. At the time we were very interested in that kind of thing, and so were going into all of these different shops. As we went further from the coast, we saw a door with a small sign saying it was another gemstone shop. So we walked in, and as soon as we stepped through the door, we were in a tiny cupboard-sized room which barely fit us both. And in front of us, behind a small counter with a glass screen, was an old man wearing glasses, sitting down on a chair in an equally tiny area. There were no shelves or seemingly any gemstones or anything at all on sale, And I said, "Oh, sorry. We thought this was a bigger shop," and we went to leave. But instead he told us to close the door and said, "It's very rude to call somebody's shop small." Both of us, being pretty socially anxious, kind of stuttered out apologies, but he just carried on talking to us. I don't remember everything he said now, but we were in there for almost an hour, because we felt extremely rude and awkward leaving, especially given how very close he was to us, being just behind a bit of glass. One of the things I do remember, though, is how he kept calling me my lord, and said things like, "I can see many great things in your future, my lord," and was asking us a lot of random questions about our lives, where we were from, what our plans for the future were, etc. He consistently referred to me as my lord, though, and it wasn't as if he was being sarcastic or mocking me for commenting on the shop size or anything. He was saying it very sincerely, which was part of the strange thing. I'm certainly not posh or rich, so it definitely wasn't a reference to that. He never once tried to sell us anything, or even mentioned what it was he did or what he did sell. Eventually he just said to us, "All right, you may leave now, my lord. But remember, next time to not comment on the size of a man's shop." We both left, very glad to finally be out of there. And as we did, 2 women came around the corner and made the same mistake as us by going into the shop. We heard them saying the same thing as we had. "Oh, sorry, we thought it would be bigger." And heard the same comment from him about how it was rude to comment on the size of the shop. As we were walking away, we saw the women close the door behind them. I never felt in danger, though it was extremely awkward and strange, and we certainly felt very rude trying to leave, until he gave us permission to do so. He asked us a lot of personal questions, and kept commenting on my future, as well as always addressing me as Lord. It was a very, very strange experience. I work part-time at a grocery store, and I usually work the closing shift. One night, about 30 minutes to closing, a lady came to my register to check out. She was polite, friendly, and seemed normal enough. She paid for her groceries, I handed her the receipt, then she left the store and all was fine. About 10 minutes after we'd closed, I'd headed out to my bike, but the woman from earlier stopped me before I could leave, and was claiming that she'd left her phone inside and needed to get it. But she hadn't left her phone. It would have been at my register, and I had thoroughly cleaned it as well as the surrounding area before I clocked out. I offered to go in regardless and check, because maybe it had been dropped on the floor somewhere. I just wanted to go home. But luckily my manager offered to call it for her, so I headed to my bike to get going. The moment I took the lock off my bike, though, the woman drove over to me and was making small talk. I found it a bit weird, as I was clearly trying to get home, and she didn't know me at all. She told me I had a cool bike, and asked me where I got it from. I explained to her that it's electric, and that I'd just bought it from Amazon. She told me that she didn't know that they made electric bikes, but then told me a few minutes later about how she has been looking to get an electric bike for a while now. She asked to take a picture of it, but then suddenly asked why I was still wearing a mask, going on about how it could give me sinus problems. I decided not to take it off, as she was taking a photo, to which I noticed the camera being aimed more at me than my bike, even though I'd stepped away so that she could get a better view of it by itself. Unbeknownst to me, my manager and another worker had been watching us this whole time, and after the woman had left, they came over to ask me if I was okay. I didn't really think much of any of it, and told them that everything was fine, and that all she wanted was to know about my bike, I then headed home, but on my way was thinking a bit more about the earlier interaction with the woman. So she'd come back to the store claiming to have lost her phone, but she had it on her the whole time. She'd taken a picture with it. She also kept repeating my name in our conversation as often as she could, almost like she was trying to memorize it. She took a photo of me as well as my mode of transport, all while trying to get me to take my mask off right before taking it, as if she needed to see my entire face. It was all really quite creepy. Even weirder, though, was when I turned back to the store to see if she was still there. I saw a police car, which after leaving the parking lot, turned on its sirens and sped off into the direction that the lady had left in. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but it just seemed really strange. Let me know what you think. So I live in the UAE, and this happened back when I was in 4th grade. Weekends here are Fridays and Saturdays, and my family and my cousin's family go on trips together often. My cousin, let's call her Naomi, is a year older than me, and Naomi's younger brother Kai was 5 years old. It was a Friday, and we were going to the zoo. Now on Fridays almost every shop is crowded, so we finished the zoo trip at about 5 and decided to go to shop for groceries. The supermarket we went to was pretty big. It had 2 floors and was really, really busy. The dads, my dad and Naomi's dad, went to check out the tech part of the store, while the moms decided to shop for the necessities. Us kids went with the moms, and as it was really crowded, we said we would just wait in the candy aisle. The candy aisle was empty except for us kids, but also this strange-looking man. We thought nothing of him at first, because we were just too busy looking at all the candy. However, I did notice that the man was on his phone talking, whilst simultaneously staring right at us. Once again we thought nothing of it, as the mums were looking for something in the aisle right next to us, and once they'd gotten what they needed, we followed them to the fruit and veg section. We were then told to stand next to the carts to wait. That's when my cousin had noticed that the strange man had followed us whilst still on his phone, and was still staring at us. We weren't entirely convinced he was dangerous, so my cousin suggested that we go to the other part of the fruits and veggies section where the moms were, to see if he followed behind us. He did. Naomi and I told the moms that we would be at the tech section, kept our cart there and went to find the dads. The man continued to follow. He was still on his phone, still speaking while staring at us. We told our dads what was happening, so they decided to actually make sure that he was following us. So both pairs of parents reunited at the meat department, and the man was still following. My dad was now convinced he was being sus, so he told me and Naomi to point at the man in a really obvious way, so we did what we were told, and my dad gave the man the scariest death stare I've ever seen. I'm sure the guy pissed himself. It worked and the man was gone. My cousin and I still talk about it to this day, and we're not really sure why he was following us, but it was pretty obvious at the time that he was up to no good. I was having a chat with my mother and sister about creepy encounters that we'd had, and each had their own good stories to tell. But for now I will be telling my sister's story. To give you a few details about my sister, she's not the type you would mess with. She regularly had creepy people walk up to flirt with her or catcall her, and usually she would tell them to shove off, as she can usually handle herself in these kinds of situations. But she told me about a certain incident that happened at Walmart years ago, and it really scared her. She was about 23 at the time and living out of state with her boyfriend, now husband. It was her day off of work and she was running errands alone while her boyfriend was at work. One of her trips was going to Walmart to pick up snacks and a gift for a birthday party. When she was heading for the toy aisle to pick out something, she noticed a man in the same aisle. He was staring at the toys. Not looking, staring. And my sister noticed right away that he didn't have a cart or anything in his hands that indicated he was shopping. My sister chose a gift and moved on to the food aisle to get the snacks she needed and a few extra things. And as she glanced up, she saw the man from before, looking at stuff, but was again not carrying anything. She became very suspicious now and decided to try something to see if the man was following her or not. She went over to the DVD aisle and he was there. She tried the home decor aisle. He was there. He was even in the women's underwear section. This really scared her, as anywhere she tried to avoid him, he would turn up in the same area. My sister had had it with this man and just wanted to get away from him, so she made her way to the checkout whilst she picked up her phone to call her boyfriend. She told him that she was being followed by this man and was afraid to go outside to her car in case he would follow her there too. Her boyfriend told her to tell one of the employees and stay with them, so she went to the cashier and told them about what was happening. The employees were really helpful, and they had someone look around the store for the man. My sister then said that while she was waiting at the checkout, she saw the man again. He saw her and ran quickly out of the store. One of the employees then walked my sister to her car safely, and thankfully she never saw the man outside or anywhere else again. Knowing my sister, though, I'm awfully glad she decided not to confront the man. Otherwise it could have been a very different story. So this happened only a few hours ago, and I'm still a little shaken up about it. I'm a roughly 5'4" female, and keep that in mind when you think about how creepy this was. It's night time, and I stupidly walked to the 7-Eleven alone. It wasn't that far from my house, so I thought, what the hell. I got there fine, bought everything I needed, and made my way out the door to start my walk home. However, there, standing right outside the 7-Eleven, was this huge, maybe 6'4" man, who was largely built too. I didn't think much of it when I saw him, but then he started talking to me. "Hey there, what's your name?" He offered his hand out for a handshake and I accepted, giving him my nickname, as I wasn't comfortable with this stranger having my real one. He then weirdly asked me for money, because apparently it was his birthday and he needed bus fare. Bearing in mind we weren't anywhere near a bus stop. I told him I didn't have any change, which was a lie, as I'm trying to save my money. But he continued asking anyway, like he knew I was lying. I was getting uncomfortable at this point, so I eventually gave in and gave him what little money I had, which was a $5 bill. And that's when things got creepy. He started saying things like, "Thank you, baby," and "Have a good day, babe." I was so uncomfortable. I wasn't even thinking clearly. I just wanted to get the hell away. Then he told me to give him a hug, which obviously I really didn't want to. But I did anyway, and thankfully he didn't try anything. But then he offered to walk me home. I told him no, but he persisted. I finally told him that I didn't think my mother would like it if he did. I know saying father or brother or boyfriend would have been smarter, and at that point he finally got the message and gave up. He called me baby one last time as I was leaving. Thankfully I didn't see him again, and he didn't follow me. I was on the verge of tears, I was so scared. And when I got home and told my mother everything that had happened, she comforted me and told me that I probably wasn't really in any danger. But it was still terrifying nonetheless. This happened to me around the end of summer, beginning of autumn 2020, when I had gotten a new job at a store that I absolutely love. The job is awesome, as after several terrible jobs I've had before, this place was a breath of fresh air. Lovely atmosphere, amazing co-workers, and the majority of the customers were very sweet. I've literally never had a bad day at work. Until this day, however. It started out like any other day. I was restocking some stuff and looking around for any customers that needed my help. Our boss is very, with lack of a better word, strict, about us making sure to always give the customers a lot of focus, no matter the task we're doing. I was putting up the last few things on the shelf, when I turned around to find a man, in his late 20s, standing right behind me and staring. I put on my friendliest smile and asked him if there was anything I could help him with. He said in broken English that he needed help with some bug repellent or something like it, so I guided him to our shelf full of different brands. We had a back and forth about what he needed, when he finally settled on one, and I asked him if there was anything else I could help him with. He asked which way the register was. A lot of customers do this since our store is a bit of a labyrinth, so I gave him a detailed description of the directions. But then he just looked at me puzzled, so I asked him if he wanted me to walk him there, and he nodded. As we were walking, he started asking me questions, like if I enjoyed my job, etc. Normal things that I answered politely. But then the questions got a bit more personal, like asking me my age, where I live, who I live with, and my work schedule. The kind of questions people don't and shouldn't really ask if you don't know them. Me, being a very shy person who doesn't want to upset anyone, tried to answer his questions without actually answering them. Then we were almost by the register, when he stopped and turned to look at me, and was standing a bit too close for comfort. I just stood there, obviously uncomfortable as he said, "I'll be coming back tomorrow to pick you up from work." I laughed awkwardly and replied, "I don't know if I'll be working tomorrow." He paused for a moment before saying, "Then I'll just come by every day, and we'll run into each other eventually." I laughed again, thinking he must have been joking, but he was looking dead serious. "We could be friends, you and I. I don't have many friends. You could be my friend," he said. He then walked off to the register by himself, as he knew the way from there, and I stood in place until I couldn't see him anymore. I looked around for a co-worker, and I spotted my boss. I ran up to her and broke down as I told her about what had just happened, and feeling terrible for breaking down, I might add. My boss asked who it was, and the guy was now by the door. So I pointed him out, and my boss walked over and spoke to him. What was said I don't know, because I went to the break room to calm down. But on my way home, I saw him by the bus stop, so I called my mum to pick me up, as I didn't feel safe going home alone. I didn't feel like I was ever in immediate danger during this encounter, but it definitely left a weird taste in my mouth. I like to think I'm good at picking up whether or not people are creeps when I first meet them, and this guy definitely gave me weird vibes. I was working at my job where I am a server, and 90% of the time our customers are incredibly kind. We have a great regular crowd, and we get to know them really well. However, one day, this man, he seemed to be in his late 20s, slowly walked in and stood a few feet away from me in a lunge-like position. Obviously putting on my customer service voice, I asked him what I could get for him, and he ordered 2 things. I asked him for his name for his order, so he gave it to me, but then he also asked for my name. Now this isn't abnormal, but he never broke eye contact and almost whispered the question. His body language was very odd, and that's what kind of threw me off, and also the personal questions he was asking me. He eventually walked off outside, and I couldn't shake the weird vibe he was giving me. A week later and I was working again, and he came in at the same time. He walked up to me and said hello, and of course I recognized him. He then looked at me and said, "That food last week was delicious," and proceeded to tell me that he'd had a dream about me, with again the same weird eye contact, weird body language, and whispering tone. Obviously this would creep anybody out, especially with the way he was acting. I asked for his name again, and after he gave it to me he said, "And your name is Sarah?" I just nodded. I was uncomfortable and my co-workers offered to take his food out. After I'd gotten off work that day, I had to pump gas at the place down the street. I got out of my car and did my usual thing, when I looked and heard my name. It was none other than the creepy customer. He was working at the gas station, of course. He got uncomfortably close to me, and this is during COVID times, so people being close to me would make me uncomfortable in general. He again started asking me questions about myself, where I was headed, when I worked, and just personal things I would never have asked a stranger. But what got me this time was his smile. Something about it just made me feel sick. I quickly stepped away, said goodbye, and got into my car. He ended up coming back a few times, but I always had my co-workers take his order instead. He thankfully eventually stopped coming by, and one of them let me know that I was the only worker who he'd ever started a conversation with. Anyway, creepy guy at work who doesn't break eye contact, whispers, stands too close to me and had a dream about me. Please don't come back in. This isn't one of those stories like, "Oh, this man looks sketchy, I almost died." But when I was 16, I genuinely believe a man in Walmart wanted to kidnap me. It started off with him following me. I noticed he was in every aisle my mom and I were in, but at first I thought it was just coincidence. He was an older man, probably in his 50s or 60s, and I just had a bad feeling about him. Just then another man in front of us dropped his wallet, and the creepy guy walked up to him, picked up the wallet, and simply put it back into the man's back pocket, instead of just handing it to him, which I thought was really odd. Shortly after that, my mum walked over to the self-checkout, and I wasn't feeling well that day, so I asked her for the keys so I could go and sit in the car and wait for her. I walked to the other side of the store, where we had parked, but although I knew the area we'd parked, I had forgotten where the actual space was, so I decided to sit on a bench that was outside the hair salon and wait until my mum was finished. Sat there playing on my phone, I got the uncomfortable feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced up and saw the creepy man staring at me. Now there's 2 things you should know. 1, the hair salon was closed, so he had no reason to be standing outside it. And 2, his groceries were bagged up, so he had already finished shopping. He asked how I was doing, and I mumbled out a "fine," then glanced back down at my phone. I kept looking up out of the corner of my eye, and every time I did this, he was still staring at me. That's when my blood ran cold, and I realized he had been standing behind us when I asked my mum for the car keys, He must have overheard and was most likely planning on following me out to the parking lot. My instincts kicked in, and I had, and to this day still do, a strong feeling that this man was up to no good. I kept trying to call my mum discreetly, but she wouldn't answer, so I got up and walked back to the other side where she was still ringing up the groceries. I then stayed with her, and when we walked out the store, the man was still standing outside the hair salon. I watched through the window when we walked out the doors, and he never took his eyes off of me. I'm so glad I never walked out to that parking lot alone, because who knows what would have happened. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.